Hi, and welcome to the finale on our series on sustainability in fashion. Thus far, we've given you an overview of all the issues the industry is facing, and we've spoken to some of our colleagues on how changes in product development and manufacturing can help tackle some of those issues. Today, we have with us Vincent Barnes, Vice President for Solution Architecture at Infor Retail. Vincent has over 25 years of experience in retail-focused IT consulting, and he's worked with many global retailers on transformation programs, giving him a deep domain knowledge on most retail verticals. So to wrap things up, we're going to get his take on one of the biggest issues the industry is facing: waste. Hi, Vincent. We started our series off with a really shocking statistic. 3 out of 5 fashion products ends up in landfill within a year. I mean, that is a stat that is almost unreal. What's your take on it? What can companies do to change that statistic?
Absolutely. I think sustainability is probably the number one challenge facing the fashion industry today. And I think we've all come to realize that we've got to make sure that sustainability is threaded through the whole of all of our businesses. I think also we've come to realize that this is such an important challenge that we can't really do this by ourselves. We have to come together as an industry to overcome some of these big objectives. And certainly, the consumer's attention is on this. We're under the spotlight, and we really have to do something in order to continue to make this an amazing industry to work in. I think the COP26 conference or summit that happened in Scotland recently has given us a good model, because it's showing that when various parties come together and work together on an agreed plan, that we can truly achieve some amazing results. And I think that's a model which we have to address or use here in this industry, because it is a complex issue. If we think of the past 10-20 years, I think fashion brands have done a great job in leveraging huge globalization across the industry. So they've sought to take full advantage of the great production capabilities and resources overseas, in order to provide great value and choice to their end consumers. We also now realize just how complex this supply chain is. If you think about, as I said earlier, the brand manufacturers all the way through to the production of the raw materials and the yarns, the production processes, all the transportation and the containerization, the inbound logistics through the distribution centers, and eventually out to the stores and the fulfillment centers. It's a very, very complex supply chain, which is obviously very, very time critical as well, dealing in very, very long lead times. But I think what's also very, very interesting as a statistic is that recent analysis has shown that sort of 80% of the bad news, 80% of the carbon emissions, of the huge water consumption, of the massive energy consumption, non-sustainable energy consumption at that, happens well up in the supply chain, well before the goods actually hit the shelves or the fulfillment center. So that means that by the time the goods move to that end final place for the customer to then consume, the bad news has already happened. So therefore, I think we can do a lot of initiatives at the end, to make things more sustainable in the sales channels. But really, obviously, the biggest opportunity is in the upfront production. And one aspect of this, which I like to focus on, there's a number of initiatives in that area, obviously, but one thing I like to focus on is the fact that, supply chain is complex, it's time critical. Everybody is therefore putting plans together to make sure that they have got the right facilities and the right resources at the right time to fulfill their contracts with their customers. So the materials manufacturers making sure that they've got the right things in the right place to satisfy production. The suppliers making sure they have the right production schedules in place and capacity in place to make sure they can fulfill purchase orders. And of course, planning plays a major part in that process. Everybody's looking at the last year and putting a plan and working out what they're going to do, and and making sure that the service levels they have between them in terms of contracts is on it, and that there's no surprises. So planning it has been a very, very important part of this fashion industry for many, many years. But what's interesting is, despite that planning and visibility to sort of demand, why is there still excess inventory in the supply chain? Why do we have excess stock at the end of the season which doesn't get used, goes to landfill, gets incinerated, etc.? Why are we dealing with a lot of waste? I think that's a key question we have to ask ourselves.
Interesting. So if we planned better, we'd be left with less unwanted waste. But planning accurately is no small feat. We've heard a lot about AI and machine learning helping in that regard. What's your take on it? Can that tech make a difference?
So let's look at what's happening today. So we already discussed how complex the supply chain is to most fashion brands today. And everybody in that supply chain is carrying out a certain amount of planning. So obviously from a fashion brand, they're putting their own assortment plan together, based on an understanding of demand for the new season, based maybe on a bit of historical information, maybe some planning or advanced forecasting, etc. They're using that to then place purchase orders against the suppliers. There are three main issues which I think are causing this. Firstly is that all planning is done in isolation. Nobody shares a plan with anybody else. It's very transactional. All the dialogue is transactional. Secondly, they're using all separate data from different parts of the supply chain to put those plans together. So a fashion brand will be using consumer research and forecasting to work out what the sales units will be for a particular style. Suppliers are using different information in terms of producing their plans or forecasts for production, and so on. Nobody's using a shared pool of information. And the third most important thing is that because of the first two, because it's isolated and using different data, to make sure that they're not getting anything drastically wrong, they're adding contingency. They're adding fat to that demand plan. And all of that fat, all of that contingency or safety stock, we sometimes call it, all of that is adding up to the 25 to 30% excess inventory that we see it in the supply chain at the end of a season. Typically goods which aren't sold and get put into landfill or get incinerated.
The fashion industry is notoriously complicated. A recent McKinsey study says that 2/3 of a company's environmental, social, and governance footprints actually lies with their suppliers. So what can a company do to reduce waste along the supply chain?
The way to fix this is to say, how can we work to a common plan against a common forecast to make sure that we only produce where there is demand? If the demand forecast says there's only a need for 5,000 of these items, of these garments, then only produce 5,000 and make sure everybody is aligned on the supply chain. Now that requires a lot of upfront planning, but key point, it needs to be collaborative, it needs to be done in partnership, it needs to be done using the same information. That is where the opportunities lie. Now, of course, the good news for this is that there are tools out there to help us. And I think, part of this, revolution in supply chain planning can only be facilitated by the cloud and the internet, by allowing us to have instantaneous collaboration with the various partners across the supply chain. And what I would hope is that although we're doing this to overcome sustainability objectives, actually by implementing closer working together, better collaboration, sharing of information and plans, that will give us the agility and the responsiveness that we need and the transparency that we need to not overcome sustainability, but whatever else the supply chain will give us in terms of disruptions going forward. That agility of supply chain, agility of all the businesses to work together to make sure that we're bringing great products to the end consumer is what I believe everybody wants to achieve, but doing it in a more sustainable way. So in essence, work together against a common plan, only produce what's needed, and don't take the guesswork out of it by working together. But I also think we as consumers, we also have a responsibility, and of course it's all up to our individual selves to think about our own buying behavior and make sure that we're making correct, sustainable choices in the future.
Thanks, Vincent. So nice to hear some positive ideas on managing waste. And that concludes our series on sustainability through technology in fashion. Watch this space for more insights on sustainability through technology in several other industries.